Right now, let's get some reaction. We're now joined via Teams by Professor Patrick Bond, the Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for Social Change at the University of Johannesburg. Prof, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Let's first get your reaction then regarding the 4 African countries being kicked out of AGOA. And of course, Mauritania has now been brought back into AGOA after a 16-year ban.
Indeed, there are going to be some back and forth situations. Central African Republic, Niger, these have gone in, gone out, and it hasn't really changed the structure of the economies in these countries. Many of them had relied on exports of raw materials, such as diamonds or some agricultural products, and they never really took advantage of the potentials for industrialization. Very few African countries really export industrial goods. South Africa certainly does, automobiles and some steel and other metal products. But by and large, AGOA hasn't performed. And in some cases, such as the Central African Republic, the amount of exports was very low, in a couple of $1 million. So I don't think we'll see too much difference. But, you know, the context is everything, which includes whether the U.S. supports democratic governments in these countries, as it claims to. That's the reason for 2 of them being kicked out. A third, CAR, on human rights grounds. The 4th, on the homophobic grounds that Uganda has. And I think these are some of the conditionalities that many African elites don't appreciate. And so this is a question then, of course, for South Africa too, because of the threat to AGOA due to South Africa's embrace of Palestinian solidarity that has already led to a bill in Congress to kick South Africa out.
I mean, I wanted to speak about South Africa's position then, Prof. I mean, its relationship with the US even. You know, there were calls last year, you know, that South Africa should be removed from AGOA, as you know, during and subsequent to the BRICS summit, which was also held in South Africa last year. You know, one got the sense that diplomatic tensions between South Africa and the US had subsided somewhat. How likely is it then, you know, just based on your point, is South Africa's genocide application against Israel in the International Court of Justice going to strain, if at all, you know, relations with the US?
It's potentially a formidable challenge to the United States ideologically and in terms of reputation. And indeed, if the genocide charges are confirmed by the International Court of Justice, which, by the way, is led by someone who comes from the U.S. State Department. So by no means is it a sure thing. There may be a bias in that court towards Israel. But assuming that the evidence which has been presented and the chief lawyer from South Africa, John Dugard, is persuasive, assuming that the Israeli conviction occurs, as I think many in the world would anticipate. The evidence is overwhelming for a charge of genocide to be upheld. That would also include the U.S. as a, let's say, conspiratorial or a power that is very much in league with Israel. And therefore, just as the United States election approaches in November this year, to have that charge of genocide, where Joe Biden is nicknamed by many critics on the left as Genocide Joe for having helped Israel, it'll make them very angry. So what would they do? Biden's main ally is in the Senate, Chris Coons from his home state of Delaware. And as you said, there was a lowering of tensions after the BRICS summit, which was last August, and then South Africa hosted the AGOA summit. So we thought that the political and geopolitical turmoil, especially associated with the ambassador here, his name is Ruben Brugetti. He charged that South Africa had given some guns to Russia in the famous Lady R incident that he couldn't prove. So tensions were high. They seem to come down, and trade relations, especially automobiles, aluminium and steel, and grapes and other horticultural goods, those are very important in some of the industries. And it seemed that we were over that hump. But now it does look like, I would guess, that the very conservative forces in the U.S. will really be taking advantage when they come back from their Christmas break in the next few days to basically hammer South Africa for its role and probable embarrassment of the State Department for supporting genocide.
I just, one more point about AGOA. I mean, it is still set to expire in 2025. And we know that, it is the United States' strongest tie with the African continent. But just touching on your point about the US's elections next year, what are we likely to see should the Biden administration not be at the front and center?
It's interesting because it looks like if the poll was today, Donald Trump would win. And already he had canceled some of the benefits that South African steel and aluminium exports into the United States had enjoyed. So he's already sort of on record as using trade as a protectionist barrier. I think it could be trouble. I mean, I also would say we should look at the potential silver lining. There may be a bright side. And the reason is that the two biggest industries benefiting, automobiles and the aluminium and steel and other smelted metals, those chew a lot of electricity, and we really do need labor-intensive businesses and small businesses and households to have more of the electricity. I think if we were to lower the exports to the US because AGOA benefits aren't there, it would mean more electricity, and probably a year we'll still face big scarcity. So we shouldn't be completely ignorant about the, let's say, demand for South African goods and how that competes with the electricity so many of us really do need. There may be, in that sense, a bright side that there could be even an economic boom if that electricity is redistributed.
So being expelled, Prof, from AGOA for South Africa, at least, will be some form of silver lining, I hear you say. But Prof, earlier to our conversation around South Africa's position on Israel and, of course, the war with Hamas, let's talk then about the regional conflict that is heating up currently in the Middle East. I mean, as a result, we know that the Secretary of State of the U.S., Anthony Blinken's trip, he's going there. Do you think it will somehow yield any results? I mean, we saw President Biden also try and intervene, earlier, late last year, and of course that didn't work.
It didn't, but things have changed, and I think many in the West have lost patience with just how many thousands of deaths, now over 22, probably 25 if you consider that we don't know because of the rubble on top of so many bodies. Now, what we saw this week was revealing, because Joe Biden's people in the State Department were very embarrassed as once again the far right in the Netanyahu-led coalition, Likud, but his far-right partners, were using very openly genocidal phrases. And they're also openly saying, we're going to be expelling Palestinians. And he even, Netanyahu's people even said, we might even have the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as a willing site where they're going to send refugees, unwillingly, I'm certain. But that's the sort of conflict where the United States just doesn't want to see yet again another Nakba, another terrible expulsion and an extermination of the Palestinians in Gaza. It's such a small strip of land. I've spent a week there, and it's so jammed in. And what Israel clearly wants is to at least have that northern part as a buffer zone, and maybe they'll use it for offshore gas or perhaps even a new canal to compete with the Suez Canal. There are lots of options if Israel succeeds in flattening and clearing out, even giving Israelis that land. And that's where the US would be, I think, quite embarrassed that really this genocide has gone way too far when it means a permanent expulsion of a people from the land, so reminiscent of the 1948 original Nakba, the catastrophe.
Prof, thank you so much for your time and your analysis this afternoon. Really do appreciate it. That, of course, is Professor Patrick Bond, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for Social Justice and Social Change at the University of Johannesburg.